Years of legislative work and advocacy, bills to legalize medical cannabis and sports betting have finally been passed out of the Kentucky General Assembly. Within 24 hours, the governor has come here to the Capitol to sign them both into law.
Today's pretty amazing. We passed two pieces of legislation that took both Democrats and Republicans, would not have passed without them. People coming together to do what's right.
Governor Andy Beshear called up 3 Republicans to the podium to discuss medical cannabis, highlighting the bipartisan nature of these achievements.
I'm filled with emotion. There are, Governor, as you know, thousands and thousands of Kentuckians who just want to be and want to feel better.
The governor says his executive order on cannabis will remain in place until the program starts in 2025. He also says in 2024, he will push for more of the conditions included in his order to become part of that program. Sports betting could take effect much sooner, but the governor says it will depend on an opinion released by the Attorney General. Whenever it does, he says they will be ready.
We got a lot of work to do, but we are happy to do it.
And the governor was also asked about House Bill 5, the bourbon barrel tax. He says the bill which passed last night is much different than the one that started out this session, adding that counties should be no worse off with the bill in place than they are now. So he says he plans to sign it as soon as today. In Frankfort, Jeremy Toms, WKYT.